Hi, Natalie. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with your audience.
I love it. I love it. So, I want to jump in because I know that you're talking with people about student loans and how to slay their debt. But I want to go back to what got you to this place. So, take us back a little bit to what was that turning point when you were like, I have to do something about my finances and my student loans. Walk us through a little bit of that story.
Okay. So, about 10 years out of law school, I just found myself buried in debt. Not only my student loans were over six figures, I also had accumulated a lot of consumer debt, like credit cards, medical bills. And I was just overwhelmed. And I was looking for answers and thinking about bankruptcy. But for a couple of years, like maybe a year or two,
Mhm.
I was just dabbling and on the fence and thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I'm an attorney. I'm working in the music industry. Like I should have it together. Like,
Mm.
how can I be in this position? But after a lot of soul searching and just like really having that like come to Jesus moment, like I've got to do something. I decided I was going to move forward with a bankruptcy. And I was consulting with different attorneys and they were quoting me their fees. And I was just overwhelmed with how much it costs to go broke. So, me having no background in bankruptcy law at all, like never took
Mm.
even one class in law school, I decided to teach myself bankruptcy law and try to figure out how to do it on my own.
Wow.
So while I'm learning bankruptcy law, I learned that there's this exception to the general rule that you can't discharge student loan debt in bankruptcy, right? Because from the moment you sign up for those loans, and even the attorneys I consulted with told me you cannot discharge student loan debt. And I
Hmm.
had already made peace with that idea. I was like, okay, fine. I won't get rid of my student loans, but I'll get rid of all this credit card debt and it'll put me in a better position to at least be able to manage those student loans. But when I was learning bankruptcy law, I was like, there's a whole exception that says if you have an undue hardship, you can discharge student loans. So I was
Hmm.
fascinated and I just like kind of dove in and just naively was like, I'm going to get rid of my student loans. Like not having any idea how big of a deal it was
Yeah.
just from the outside and just reading the law and the statute. I'm like, okay, this sounds like me. I'm going to give it a go. Meanwhile, the attorneys who had been practicing bankruptcy for a long time were looking at me like, who does this girl think she is? Like, we can't get rid of student loans. And they would stop me in the hallway and be like, sweetie, you're wasting your time. It's impossible. So, and I'm like the Elle Woods of this world, right? Like, you know
Mm.
how in Legally Blonde, she gets into Harvard and she's has no idea how hard it really and what a big deal
Yeah.
it really is. So I'm like, I'm gonna get rid of my student loans. What? Like it's hard. So fast forward, I got rid of $120,000 of my own student.
Wow.
And then
Wow.
I was like, I'm gonna do this for other people, right? Like, because I'm like, I'm gonna help everybody. Like, why don't more people do this? Like, I'm gonna
Yeah.
save my people. I'm gonna liberate my people. And I've been doing it for 10 years. Like, I've thought my case, okay, maybe it's a fluke. Let me try it again. And I kept having successes. And I was in private practice for almost a decade, but the pandemic was not kind to bankruptcy attorneys because
Mm.
everyone got breaks on student loans, breaks on evictions, foreclosures. So it was very hard to stay in solo practice.
That
So
makes
I
sense.
joined the Legal Aid Society as a staff attorney. So I do the same exact work, but just for low income New Yorkers.
Wow.
So that's just my story in a nutshell.
Yes, yes. I
But
want to
that's
unpack some of those pieces because there was a lot there and all of it is pretty awesome. My first question is, what made you think bankruptcy, right? Because I think lots of times all of us, like we struggle with student loans, we have all this debt, but I feel like bankruptcy is usually the furthest thing of consideration. So what made you make that leap to even think about, maybe bankruptcy could be an option before you were a bankruptcy attorney?
Right. I mean, I just knew I had to do something, and like what I was doing wasn't working, right? And I didn't know a lot about bankruptcy. It just sounded like this scary thing that, oh my gosh, you like a scarlet letter or something terrible. But the more I learned about it and the more I really got background information on who files bankruptcy and why, I was just like, this is a tool that you can use to get back on your feet and get a fresh start, and the whole history behind bankruptcy. And it was used to, that law was introduced. I mean, this is as old as the US Constitution. And of course,
Wow.
prior to that, I mean, bankruptcy is not the word bankruptcy in the Bible, but
The
there in the Old
practice. Yeah.
Testament, that shall be forgiven every 7 years. And it's in
Hmm.
the Constitution, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
And it's used to encourage people to take risks and be able to start over if things go wrong. So you look at people like Walt Disney, Henry
Hmm.
Ford, famous people who have filed for bankruptcy and gone on to do amazing things, right? So the more I learned about it, the more I realized that it's a good thing and not a
Hmm.
bad thing, right? So this is what will allow me to relieve myself of the burden and the stress of like running from my creditors, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, one thing about the bankruptcy that I learned is that you are allowed to have certain assets. Like, it's designed so that you can keep your house and your car and have money in the bank. And the things that people think, especially from what you see in the movies, that
Hmm.
you literally lose everything and you can't have anything. And that's not true, because if that were the case, then it would be pointless, because how can you really get a fresh start if you don't have
Right.
a roof over your head, a car to drive, and things like that? So
So dig into that a little bit more. So what does that look like? Like, let's say I do decide to file bankruptcy. What are the things that I am losing? And then what are some of those things that, to your point, are protected?
right. Okay, so in a chapter 7, that's called a liquidation bankruptcy, and that's supposed to be if you're actually letting go of things, and the trustee can liquidate non-exempt assets. But most cases, people don't have non-exempt assets. So let me explain what an exemption is,
Hmm.
right? So exemptions are put in place to give you the opportunity to hold on to certain things. For example, in New York City, the 5 boroughs of New York City, Long Island, Westchester, the homestead exemption is about $180,000, right? Which is higher than most places in the country. So you
It's New
can have
York,
that
right?
much, yeah, you can have
Yeah.
that much equity in your home and still keep your home and get rid of your debt.
Hmm.
Aside from the homestead exemption, there's a motor vehicle exemption, about $5,000. So you can have a car with that's either worth 5,000 that's fully paid off, or a car with about up to $5,000 of equity in the car. Retirement accounts are unlimited, so people can have $500,000 in their retirement and still get rid of debt. The sad thing is that a lot of people don't even decide to file for bankruptcy until they've gone through all of their savings and all of their
Hmm.
retirement. And it makes me sad, because had they known, they would have got rid of their debt instead of trying to live off and exhaust everything that they
Yeah.
had before they made that decision, right?
Hmm.
So exemptions, there are all types of exemptions, right? Not just the basics like a house and a car, but jewelry, clothing, household
Wow.
goods. And depending on where you live in the country, you can either use your state exemptions or the federal exemption. Some
Hmm.
states allow you to use both. Some you have to use the state exemptions. But exemptions are basically like, think of the MC Hammer song, Can't Touch This. So you're just telling the court and your creditors, like, can't touch this, can't touch my house, can't touch my car, can't touch my retirement. And yeah, this debt is going to be gone, and I'm going to be able to hold on to what I have and rebuild and start over.
It sounds almost too good to be true, right? But I think, to your point, wealthy
Right?
people have been using this for a while. So what is
Yes.
the part? I mean, I think to your point, you said earlier, you came in sort of like, this is going to be really easy. And everyone was like, you don't know what you're doing. So why don't more people know about this or take advantage of this?
Right. Well, bankruptcy in general, I think, is a scary word that people don't understand how it really works. They
Mm,
just think, oh my gosh, it's like a failure, right? It's sort of like divorce, but now divorce is more accepted. But if you go back to
that's a
like
good
the
point.
50s and 60s, where people would stay in an unhappy marriage because they didn't want the stigma of divorce, right? But with bankruptcy, I think it's taking a little bit longer to catch up and where people, and it's like if right because
Yeah.
like if you don't know what it is, you're just like, oh, they're bankrupt. And then think about like Wheel of Fortune when someone goes bankrupt, right? And they like all their money is gone. And it's not like that. That's just drama for TV,
That's good
right?
to know. Yeah.
And then I guess people, if people don't understand that how exemptions work and how you can keep things, then that's why it still has a bad rap. So part of my mission is to educate people and let them learn that it's like if you're drowning and there's a lifesaver right there at your disposal, but
Hmm.
you decide you don't want it and you're just going to try to swim to shore by yourself, like that's tragic, right? It's like
Yeah.
there's a tool right there that can literally save your life, right? And you're just like,
Yeah.
no thanks,
And
right?
it's happens to, I think, mostly probably, right, minorities, because we're not familiar with that. And there is such a
Right,
stigma around finances and being poor. And you're like, well, I went to school, I have this amazing
right,
high education, and yet I can barely pay for things. And so it's
right.
sad because we're often the ones that probably should be leveraging these types of tools, but we have the least information and potentially access to it in those ways.
Exactly. So that's bankruptcy in general. So the
Yep.
bank getting rid of student loans in bankruptcy is even more of a mystery
Hmm.
and like a shock to people when you tell them, oh yeah, I got rid of 120K of student loans, or I just got rid of 100 or $200,000 of student loans for my client. And
Wow.
it still blows people's minds.
Yes, I want to
So
break. Let's get into
yeah.
that.
So
Yes.
I want to tell you, I want to explain to you and your audience what the criteria is for discharging a student loan in bankruptcy and why it's really not this impossible mountain to move, especially nowadays. Like it was harder when I first started 10 years ago, but it's gotten easier over the years and it's
Mhm.
only going to get easier. So the criteria in most jurisdictions, the majority rule is called the Brunner test. And there's three parts to it, and you have to prove what's called undue hardship, right? So
Mhm.
the first part is, are you able to cover your basic necessities, like your basic cost of living, and be able to afford the minimum payment on your student loan, right? So what the court considers your basic necessities are housing, whether you're paying your mortgage or rent. So, housing, utilities, you got to keep your lights on, transportation, whether you have a car payment or you're taking public transportation or Ubers. So, you need transportation, you need food, clothing, you need to be able to pay for your medical expenses, things like that.
Mhm.
So, as long as your monthly budget, if you look at only the basic things, the question is, do you have enough after you've covered your basic needs to be able to pay the minimum payment on your monthly student loan payment? And now one of the most recent changes is that the law has established that they're only looking at the standard payment, not the
Mm.
imaginary income driven
I was
repayment.
just going to ask you about that. Yeah, that's
Right. So the
interesting.
income driven repayment, sometimes it's as low as zero, right? Because
Mhm.
it's based on your income. But under this analysis, they're looking at what is the standard payment? Like, what is the real payment? Is it $300? Is it $400? And after you've shown your monthly budget and your monthly expenses, if you don't have enough disposable income to cover the minimum payment, then you satisfy the first part of the test.
Wow.
The second part of the test is, are your current circumstances likely to persist for a significant period of time, right? Is it a temporary setback, or is it something that you can see going forward? Like, have you peaked at your income earning potential? Do you have any other circumstances in your life, like a medical condition or a sick child or a sick parent, other things that are impacting your ability to earn more and be able to really put a meaningful dent in the debt? And then the third prong is good faith, right? Are you doing your best? Have you tried to make the payments, even if you haven't actually made a payment, but have you stayed in communication with your lender? Have you requested a forbearance or a deferment when, when you couldn't afford it? So have those three things: the minimal standard of living, or the basic cost of living analysis. The second is the additional circumstances analysis, like how likely is the circumstance to how likely is it to persist. And then the third one is good faith, right? Are you doing your best to maximize your income, minimize your expenses, things like that? So once those three boxes are checked, then you've satisfied the undue hardship test and you can discharge your student loans, right? So like, imagine me, right? Like, reading this and thinking like, yes, this is me. And then talking to attorneys who've been doing it for 20, 30, 40 years, and they're telling me I can't.
Wow.
I beg your pardon?
Yeah. Why is that so prevalent? Like where is there a question that makes it less likely?
I mean, I think it's done on purpose to really program us that you are trapped forever. Like you're never getting out of this and there's no way out. And you just accept it as part of this is life, right? Like rewind back to the 50s and 60s when we were sitting on the back of the bus or whatever.
Yeah.
I guess this is what we have to, and then nobody questioned it. And then somebody said, what? Like, this is not okay, right? It has to take but it's not an overnight thing. It takes a while before people finally were like, no, it's not okay. We look at it in 2023, like that's insane.
Yeah.
Right. So I think if we fast forward into the future and then people look back at why student loan debt has been non-dischargeable and this impossible, it's just insane to me that you can gamble your whole life savings away or run into debt gambling and go to bankruptcy and discharge it. You can be a corporation that's causing harm to millions of people and go bankrupt and start over. But someone who went into debt to pursue a higher education and better their lives can't get out of debt forever. And it's by design. I mean,
it is.
Honestly, because poor people of color are the ones most impacted by student loan debt. So they don't want to help us. It's like, you can't be educated and free. Like,
right. You're asking for a little too much now.
Too much. Like, stay in your place. And that's really got me just fired up. And I just want to like shout from the mountaintops, like, free yourselves, break the chains, like
that. But that's so powerful. One, that you took the extra step to say, let me look into this, right? Because a lot of people don't, right? You just take what you're given. We assume they must know best. This is probably impossible, right? And so that is also part of the challenge, is if we don't have the means, if we don't understand, if we don't know to continue probing, it's very easy to just be like, well, I tried, I talked to somebody, but they told me it was impossible. And so I feel like I'm just stuck. And so I'm grateful that you are doing this. You're working on this movement. I want to break it down even more specifically. So let's say, I know you said you have to show the good faith. Do you have to be in default already in your loans? Or is it just like, as long as you are struggling and you can demonstrate that, you still have an opportunity to be able to pursue this?
Right. So, I mean, the longer your payment history or the longer you've been out of school, the better. So you can have a good track record, right? So for me, I had been out of school almost 10 years, right? And paying on this loan for almost 10 years consistently. It was like a mortgage payment, no exaggeration, like over $1,000 each month. right? So my good faith box was checked, big
Mm,
check mark on that one, right? And it's sad that even after a decade, I still had that much student
yeah,
loan debt,
it's so
right?
true. Yeah.
So, but it's not necessary to have like this solid payment history. It's like you have to be able to show like I'm doing my best, and if I can't afford the monthly payment, I'm reaching out. Like you can show that I called my lender to ask for a deferment. I called my lender to ask for a lower payment. You have to show that you're looking for work, right? That you're
Mm-hmm.
not just like sitting on the couch watching daytime TV and
Right.
waiting for, this job to magically appear. So,
Mm-hmm.
showing that this is how many resumes I sent out, and look at all these rejection letters I've received. So good faith is all not only your payment history, but your efforts to maximize your income.
Okay.
Right. And also minimize your expenses to show that I'm not out here living my best life. I'm doing the very best I can. Like I moved back in with my parents. Like that's a demonstration that I'm doing what I can. Like I didn't go rent a
Penthouse suite.
penthouse somewhere. You know what I
Right.
mean? So
Yeah.
like if I were living in a penthouse suite, that would be a demonstration of bad faith, right? Like that would be like clearly you don't want to pay Sally Mae. You'd rather live in a
Yep.
fabulous penthouse.
Yeah.
But that was not the case, right? So
That's
that's the
super
good
helpful.
faith analysis. And it's not hard, especially for people who have been out of school. I mean, at least 5 years where you can, and so many people have been out of school 5 years, 10 years, even 20 years,
Wow.
and their
Yeah.
balances are still sky high. And it feels
Mm-hmm.
like it has not moved since they finished school, even though they've been making payments consistently.
Yeah, I mean, I think even with the pause, right? So a lot of people who at least still had their loans within federal student loans over the
Mhm.
pandemic, right? They had a pause, and so, but there are still people who still have tons of debt, right? Because for whatever reason it gave them a break, but they also may have been unemployed during that time period, and so it still wasn't
Mhm.
even a break. Does that play into it at all in terms of has that helped or hurt in any way because people already had this like 3-year break where they didn't have to pay student loans? How is that, or is that factored in any way?
Well, I mean, it's just we're just kind of starting to get back into the whole repayment thing, but it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't really affect because especially it only helped the borrowers, but it doesn't really impact the hardship
Sure.
argument
Yeah.
because we were all in this la la land, including the government, right?
Yes.
They're just now trying to sort themselves out. The servicers are overwhelmed, they're understaffed, like nobody knows what's going on, which is why there's this grace period sort of built in for everybody to sort themselves out,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people don't know about. It's called the on-ramp to repayment. So even if you ignore your lender or servicer until September of next year, there are no negative consequences, right? There's not going to be any negative reporting or collection
Hmm.
activity
Is your
for that
interest
time.
still accumulating though over
Yeah,
that
the
time?
interest did
Yes.
resume on September 1st of this year, but even though the payments are due, there is still this 12-month on-ramp to repayment.
To help people get back into the game.
Yeah, to help everyone get back into the groove,
Yep.
because for 3.5 years, it was this magical world where student loans don't exist. Well, for a
Right.
lot of us, right? If
Yeah.
we're talking about federal direct loans, if private loans, the payments were still ongoing, the interest was still accruing.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with what are called FFEL loans, which are guaranteed by the government, but they're funded by private banks. They don't issue those anymore. But a lot of people who went to school in the 90s and early 2000s have FFEL loans, and they were continuing to accrue interest during the pandemic, and they didn't get the benefit of the payment pause. Those were
Mm.
like the worst ones to have. And of course, you can consolidate. Now it's kind of too late, it's pointless,
Yeah.
but people during that time could have consolidated an FFEL loan and turned it into what's called a direct loan.
Got it.
So I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but
Yeah. Yeah.
I just want people to get the idea of what's possible and that there are solutions. You just have to like look for answers.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. Those are all of the positives, but I know there are some negatives to bankruptcy. So, what happens after you eliminate your student loans with bankruptcy? Like, what happens to your credit score? Are you able to buy a house? Like, what are some of the other things that maybe you still will be debt free, but you may have some other limitations or other things to
Right.
think about?
I mean, for most of us, the only place to go is up, right? So even though the stigma and people think, oh my gosh, I'll never be able to get a credit card again or buy a house. And all of that is actually false, right? Because think about it. I want people to use the logic here. And this is what kept me trapped for so long,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you have, let's say, $50,000 of debt and you make $100,000 a year, like you owe half of your annual salary, right? But when you
Yeah.
wipe out that 50K, now you have zero debt and still the same income. So your income to debt to income ratio improves drastically, right? And then you are also actually more attractive to the creditors because you are now debt free, you don't owe anyone else. And the law says that you cannot file another bankruptcy for another 8 years, right? So they know that if they extend you credit, they have you on the hook for at
At
least
least
that
8 years.
long,
Yeah.
right? So, and a lot of times when people are in a position to file bankruptcy, their credit scores are probably in the 500s, sometimes even lower, like 400 or whatever, or even like low 600.
Mm-hmm.
So once they're coming out of bankruptcy and they get a discharge, their score will boost automatically even without them trying, right?
Yeah.
I mean, some of the negatives, like let me just, since you did ask specifically about the negatives, I would say trying to rent an apartment after bankruptcy is very difficult because potential landlords will look at that as a negative and they won't want to rent to you. But there are alternative ways to go about looking for a place to live. Or if a person is in transition and they come to me and they say, oh, I'm trying to move or my lease is up, I will have them hold off on filing bankruptcy until they're settled into their new apartment.
Yep. That makes sense.
And then you file, get rid of your debt. So that's one of the only things that I've seen is a drawback, a negative, is finding a new apartment and getting a landlord to rent to you. But other than that, it's only good things. Like you're going to be flooded with credit card offers after that
Really?
discharge is entered. They're going to say, oh, look at Ariel. She's so fresh and brand new. It's like she's 18 again. I mean, and I don't know the age bracket of your
But
audience,
yes.
but people in their 40s, approaching 50s, who went to school in the 90s, early 2000s, you all remember when we were in college and the credit card companies couldn't wait to get us to sign up for credit cards
It's
because
true.
you're like brand new. But I bring you back to the college days and the credit card offer days because that's what it's going to feel like when you're fresh out of bankruptcy, because it's like you're a clean slate 18-year-old again, and which I caution my clients into like avoiding getting back into the same routines that brought them to bankruptcy in the first place, right? To just use credit responsibly and only charge what you can pay in full every month when the bill comes so that you're not carrying the balance and accumulating and paying interest. So that's the trap of debt. But if you use it responsibly, it's good.
So is there a period of time before, like I know for some things, it's like with foreclosure, you have to wait 7 years. With bankruptcy, is it 8 years before it falls off? Like if you built up your credit, can you go and buy a house in 3 years, or do you need to wait out that sort of 8 year period before you can do it?
So you can qualify for an FHA loan after 2 years out of bankruptcy.
Wow.
Right.
Okay.
The bankruptcy itself will stay on your credit report for 7 to 10 years, right? Depending on which chapter you file.
Okay.
But you know what's worse on your credit report? $100,000 of debt that you can't pay. That's worse than the bankruptcy, right? But people don't see it that way. They just think of like, if the bankruptcy is there, then it's like the end of the world. But you have to really use logic to know, like, if you have no debt or very little debt, that's better than staying in a massive amount of debt that you can't pay.
Yeah.
Now, if you know that there's a way that you have a strategy that you can get out of this debt based on your current circumstances, not some pie in the sky thing,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Not like, oh, I might win the lotto or somebody might die and leave me money, but I'm talking about based on what you currently have and currently are dealing with. How, if you know that it would take you more than 5 years to pay off the debt realistically, then
Mm,
bankruptcy is probably the better option,
that's
right?
really interesting.
Yeah. So if you know that no matter how hard I tried, there's no way I could be out of this debt in 5 years, then really look at bankruptcy as an option. But
Hmm.
if you can get aggressive, right? The thing is, if you're young, you have time, like single, I'm just using an example, a single guy with no kids who can work a full-time job and then do like Uber full-time on the side
Yep.
and make like an extra couple thousand a month and then pay off his debt aggressively. He's in a different position than a single mom who has 3 kids who has to come home and she can't work
A whole
18
nother
hour
shift.
days,
Right. Yeah.
right? She's got to take care of her kids and still have time for herself. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So if you know that there's no other way out of this debt, like just know that bankruptcy is an option. And
Hmm.
I invite people to learn more about it and know. And the thing is, I'm only in this position because I was helping myself, right? Because
Yeah.
if I had the money to pay a lawyer, I would have just trusted what they told me, even though I am a lawyer, right?
Yeah, that's
It's like you're
true.
going to an authority to tell you to give you answers, right? It's only because I was looking for my own answers.
Hmm.
And then there's YouTube, there's the internet. Like before then, you just had to trust what the doctor told you, what the lawyer
That's
told
right.
you as true. Now we have all this information at our fingertips, and you can learn what there's a whole exception to
Yeah.
this student loan rule that nobody talks about, and they just keep the wool over your eyes. And I that's definitely by design. Like the more I think
Yes.
about it and talk about it, I'm like, yeah, they don't want us to be free, you know?
No, no, I agree. And I love that you talked about that because I was talking maybe the last episode, I can't remember. But yeah, like there for so long there were these gatekeepers to anything that could financially empower people, right? Like I have a friend who's working on alternative investments. There always was a gatekeeper that you had to go through. You had to go to a financial advisor for your money. Now this, right? You have to go to an attorney. And so we got so used to whatever these people say as quote experts
Mhm.
being as good as gospel, right? But
Right.
now, to your point, that some of us have had the opportunity to work with people or to work for organizations where we see this happening or to just get the education for ourselves. We don't necessarily have to wait for this like magical person, right? We can work with also, I love working with other Black women, right? But we can
Yeah,
work with other people who actually have our best interest in mind, right? And that is how we
exactly.
start to take over and live truly, to your point, free and wealthier lives. We've got to
Right.
really start understanding all of these tools and loopholes, whatever you want to call them. People call them loopholes, but they were built
Right.
on purpose, right? They were built to give
Right.
people the chance to thrive. We just have been kept away from them for so long. So that's really powerful that you said that. What
Exactly.
are some of the other mindset shifts that either you had to make or people that you work with have to make to really step into this, right? Because there is, I'm sure, people who are like, yeah, I want to do this. And then I'm sure as you start going down the path, do people start to backpedal and get nervous? Like, what do you think is the biggest mindset shift, or what are some strategies that people should really think about when they're going down this path or considering
Right.
this path?
Okay, so one thing is that you have to be confident in yourself and not be intimidated by the system or
Mm,
old white guys in suits, right? Because even me having gone to law school, having a law degree, and working as an attorney for a decade before I did this process, representing myself in court was very scary, right? Like I would be nervous and sweaty, and I would literally be like the only Black woman in the room, or the only Black person. There's not that many women in this space, not many women of color, right?
Yep.
I mean, now court is virtual, so it's not as scary. I mean, it's if I'm talking to someone who potentially would want to do this process and go through it on their own. So one thing I'll empower people with is nobody can advocate for you the way you can advocate for yourself, right? And it's not only because I'm an attorney, it's because, like, why am I going to pay somebody else to advocate for me? And they need all the information from me in order to be able to do it, right? And this goes across the board, not just with law, but with finances and health, right? Like, we trust these doctors to tell us, like, you know, give us answers and tell me. And it's like, you know your body, you can look for answers, and you don't have to go the traditional route always. So I really want to empower people to know that you can do this for yourself, and it's not hard. And one of my things that I pride myself on is teaching, right? I teach other lawyers to do what I do. I teach something called continuing legal education, and teaching lawyers all across the country about discharging student loan debt in bankruptcy. I also teach consumers and coach clients who are representing themselves through this process, and know that you can learn it and do it on your own, and you don't need to pay an attorney $10,000 or $20,000, right? Because I consult other attorneys sometimes who are charging their clients 20 grand to do this, and they don't even know what they're doing, right? They're asking
and
me
those are people who, like, they could be putting that 20 grand towards those loans, right?
Right.
Now there's,
I mean, but those are like extreme circumstances. I mean, that particular case, that was somebody who owed like almost $1 million of student loans, right?
Oh my gosh. So it's a drop in the bucket in comparison.
Like, and I mean, and they have other resources they can pull from. Me, I've never gotten 20 grand to help somebody through this process. But again, I'm not some Wall Street white guy, right? In a suit, like, and it's a little different. But I say all that to say that even the guys who are charging 20 grand for this process don't know what they're doing, right? They're asking me for help, right? Right? So I say all that to say that you are your best advocate. You just need the information, you just need the tools, and when you step into that courtroom, or if it's a virtual courtroom, whatever it is, just know, like, you can do this, and it is your God-given right to be free and not be burdened with this for the rest of your life, which is basically what they're telling you. Like, oh, you have a 30-year payment plan, or even a 20-year plan. I'm like, why would I want to spend my whole adult life in debt? Right? Like, what was the point of going to school and getting this degree? I mean, of course, the degree makes you feel good, right? Your parents are proud. You get to walk across the stage in a cap and gown. But when you get home and you're looking at those bills, and you work at the Gap with like a master's degree, which is a real life, that's not even made up,
it's
right?
True.
So it's like, well, what is this all for? Like, what are we really doing just to be able to say you have the degree or some letters behind your name? It's not supposed to be like that. It's not supposed to be like that.
Yeah, or killing. I mean, there's so many people who, I was actually talking to a friend just this weekend about so many people who were killing themselves for years, right? With these like $1,500 and $2,000 and $300,000, or not $3,000 student loan payments, right? And for years, scrimping. And the other thing that's hard about that, which is why I think it's interesting you mentioned retirement is unlimited, at least in New York. It's because when you're putting all of that money into paying your student loans, it's taking away from money that you could be putting in investments that would be growing and would be multiplying, so that by the time you actually finish paying your loans, you would have a security net, right? And so it almost like kills you on both ends, because that's what most people who are able to build wealth are doing. They're putting in money in a 401k from very early on in their career, right? And if you're putting so much and it's this huge hardship, right? Like it does hurt you down the line. And so I think that is something that we don't think about either,
Right.
is what's the trade-off you're making to be able to try to struggle your way through this instead of just looking for other tools
Right.
and other avenues. I wanted to touch on, I know we're going to have to wrap up a little soon, but so what does someone, let's say, right, I wanted to go, I'm confident, I think bankruptcy is the next step for me. What are some of the things that people should start doing or evaluating to see if this is really something they want to continue to go forward with?
Okay. So one of the first things you have to ask yourself, how much debt do you have? Like, is it worth it? Right. And if we're talking about student loan debt, we know that most people have a significant amount, but we're just talking about debt in general. I don't recommend bankruptcy for someone who owes $10,000 or less, right? Because there are other ways they can pursue other alternatives, maybe a side hustle, maybe some type of debt management program. But if you owe $10,000 or more, which is the most, for most part, people with student loans, and usually if you have student loans, you have other debt as well. It's not just student loans. So the amount of debt has to be worth your while to try to go through this process. Number two is if you don't have any non-exempt assets, right? Which most of us don't. So if you have assets that can be potentially liquidated, like let's say you have a vacation home or an antique car or something, or a piece of artwork or something that's valuable to you that you could potentially lose in the bankruptcy, then that would give you pause. Or you could do a Chapter 13 bankruptcy, which is for people with higher income and have non-exempt assets that they want to protect. But if you're just, first of all, if you're renting and you don't own a home and you owe more than $10,000, I don't know why you wouldn't file bankruptcy, unless there's some type of potential windfall down the line that you are like clear that is going to happen, not just a pie in the sky, but you know that something is coming soon to rescue you from this situation. But anyone who's struggling with that, and you ask yourself honestly, and you look at your budget, if I did the very best I could and put all of my disposable income towards paying my debt off, would I be out of debt in 5 years? Right. And if the answer is no, then why wouldn't you file bankruptcy? Why would you want to struggle and then still be in debt in 5 years? Are you going to look up even after all that struggle and still be in debt? Like, no. So those are the questions that you should ask yourself to figure out, is bankruptcy right for me, right? And then to be eligible, of course, for Chapter 7, your income has to be below a certain amount. So for example, a household of one, so meaning a single person with no dependents in New York, if they make less than $65,000 a year, then they're eligible for Chapter 7 with no problems, assuming they don't have any non-exempt assets. But there's no one size fits all. You would have to definitely have someone evaluate your situation, at least consult with an attorney. But there's tons of information online, right? If you go on YouTube and just search, there's so many videos that explain the bankruptcy process for free. Like they're free videos, right?
Yeah.
And there are nonprofits out there that help people file bankruptcy for free, legal aid. So if there's a legal aid society wherever you are, reach out to Legal Aid Society if your income is low enough and you're eligible. So there's so many resources out there, and it's all at our fingertips, right? It's not like, go back 20, 30 years, the internet is new. Nobody knows like
right.
out there.
Stuff,
Like,
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like we didn't really have all this information at our disposal back then, right? And now, I mean, I think people are even getting smarter about taking out student loans in the first place. It's like now they know what a trap it is. But when we were young, we were like, well, okay, if I want to go to school, I can borrow money and I can get a student loan and it's okay. I'm going to be able to pay it off. Right. And just naively not understanding really the impact of what that really means is
Yeah.
taking on this huge debt. So
Yeah, that's really helpful because I know it seems like more people should just know and be aware of this. But I think to your point, a lot of it's out there, but not everybody knows where to go or how to seek it. And so it's helpful to at least break it down to understand what are some of those next steps that we should be taking. I know we're getting close. This is great. I could keep talking. I'm also really curious about bankruptcy and would love to dig into that more. But I want to make sure we have time to go through our rapid fire questions. And then I'll also give an opportunity for you to share people can learn more and talk with you. But what is one tip or resource that the listeners can use right now to get started on their student loan repayment journey, or just maybe a broader debt reduction journey?
Right. Okay, well, for anyone with student loans, federal student loans, I implore you to bookmark this website and use it as a resource all the time. It's called studentaid.gov, and it's the federal government's website regarding anything related to student loans, repayment options, forgiveness programs, consolidation, like literally anything you need to know about your federal student loans will be on that website. I mean, honestly, like if you have that website, you probably don't need me. I mean, if you want to file bankruptcy, you might need me, but like getting all the general information. And there's so many companies out there who want to charge people to help them with like the paperwork or whatever. And it's like, if this person went to college and they have student loans, they are intelligent enough to navigate studentaid.gov on their own. They just don't know it exists, right? Because I don't know why they don't educate us on our student loans. Like, so
they don't want to lose the
so
money.
many people don't even know
income for them. Yeah.
A lot of people don't even know what kind of student loan they have. They're like, I don't know. I'll be like, what kind of student loans do you have? Federal, private, combination, what kind of federal? No one has a clue what's going on.
It's so true.
So studentaid.gov as a resource, you can find out who your lender is, who your servicer is, what your interest rate is, like all the information related to your account. Like you can log into your own FSA account, your federal student aid account, to get all your loan information. And then all the general information is there as well. So that's my number one resource for bankruptcy and for student loans. My number one resource for bankruptcy and learning about bankruptcy is a website called upsolve.org. They are a nonprofit organization that assists people, and depending on your jurisdiction, because they're not all over the country, but they help people file Chapter 7 bankruptcy for free. They have to meet certain criteria, but even if you're not going to use them, the information on that website is like so valuable. Like it's like you're going through a law school course, even better because it's written for the people, right? In perfect plain language that explains the bankruptcy process from start to finish. So they're awesome.
That's
awesome. So those are my top two resources.
And we will link to both of those in the show notes. So upsolve.org and studentaid.gov. That's great. What has been the biggest influence in your journey to creating a wealthy life, however you define what a wealthy life is?
Oh my gosh. Oh, so many. I mean, since we're talking about finances and we're talking about getting out of debt, one of I discovered him after bankruptcy. I'm not such a huge fan of him now, but Dave Ramsey, he wrote a book. Now I'm forgetting the name of the first book I read from him, but he talks about being debt-free and living a debt-free life. So he was a major influence on me. And then later on, fast forward a few years, I discovered Tiffany Aliche, the Budgetnista, Black woman, financial educator. I've actually collaborated with her and done some webinars for her tribe. And I love her. She's amazing. She just wrote a new book. Anything related to finance, getting your financial life in order. She's amazing. She's down to earth. She's just the best. So especially for Black women, if you want to learn about finances, go follow the Budgetnista. So those are my gurus, I guess.
I love it. And what do you most want? So most of my audience is moms, right? But what do you most want other moms to know or want moms to know?
I guess, I mean, I don't have any kids. I have my nephews, which
Mhm.
they're like my babies too, and my friends' kids. They all call
Yes.
me auntie. And I guess one of the things I guess I want to drive home for moms is to take care of yourself so you can be good for your kids and not, and then knowing that, like, give them your love and time and energy and not to run yourself into the ground to pay back debt that it's like if you're working a second job and making yourself sick and you're not there for your kids and you're missing those special moments, like it's just not worth it. Like when there are
Mm.
tools out there to help you relieve some of that burden and not running into you're not running yourself into the ground to pay Sally Mae back. Like, are you kidding me?
Right.
Meanwhile, like you're missing your kid's soccer game or dance recital and you're stressed out and you're like lashing out at them because the stress is getting you. So take care of you, get your financial life in order, financial wellness, of course, all of it, emotional wellness, all of that. But right now we're speaking about
Mhm.
finances. So if you free yourself, then you can be a better mom, right?
Yeah.
So, or
Yeah.
a better auntie or whatever, you know what I
Right,
mean?
right. And help take care of other things because you're not putting it all towards debt. And then what does living a wealthy life mean to you?
Time and time freedom and just independence where you can make your own decisions and you don't have to feel trapped. A wealthy life is being able to plan a fabulous trip and not worry about like can I take this time off or can I spend this money
Mhm.
and just like the joy from the little things. Oh, health. Oh my God. Health
Yes.
is wealth. As someone who has struggled with their health over the years, like if you don't have your health, like what do you really have, right? Because
Hmm.
you can have $1 million in the bank, and if you can't get out of bed for whatever reason, whether it's mental or physical, then what is the point? So I
Yeah.
always prioritize health. There's a line in an NDRE song who that's like my philosophy, and I can't even remember the name of the song, but she kind of talks about the things that she values, and it's health, love, prosperity, and peace. And that's my
Mm,
philosophy, right?
that's so good.
Health, love, prosperity, and peace. Like without those things in that order, because you could have the love of your life, and if you're sick and
That's true.
like how can you be deliriously in love if you're like in
Right.
pain and you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
those things, those that's my mantra. Those are my values, right? So
That's so
that's what a
good.
wealthy life looks like for me. Health, love, prosperity, and peace.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much, Natalie. This has been great. Where can the listeners learn more about you and or what's next for you?
Okay, yeah. So my website is slaystudentloandebt.com, and you can follow me at Slay Student Loan Debt on Instagram. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can find me there. Yeah, and then you can book a free discovery call on my website. And if you want to talk to me or reach out, feel free. And what's next? I mean, I will be launching an online course, a student loan debt boot camp right after the new year. So stay tuned for that. You'll see more information about that on my website and my Instagram. And I just want to be able to empower student loan borrowers, especially Black women, on
Hmm.
like taking their lives back. And so just follow me to learn more, get more information about my course. My dream one day is to write a book and just put it out
Okay.
there so people can learn from my story. And I mean, I have so much more to share besides student loans and bankruptcy.
Yes, we have
My
to
story is
unpack
a
that next
doozy. So
time.
so we're gonna have to do a whole other podcast on that. But
Yes.
the point is just stay tuned and I'm excited about the future and possibilities and just empowering Black women, right?
Yes. Yes.
So
100% yes. I'm right there with you. Thank you so much. This has been amazing. I am super excited. We will link to all of those things in the show notes and I will look out for your boot camp coming up because that would be really awesome. I'm sure my audience would love it.
right.
So thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome. My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.